So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome today's first speaker, Heather Carruthers, President of Ipsos UU in the US. Heather, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ellen, and welcome everyone. As Ellen mentioned, I lead our qualitative insights team for Ipsos in the US, and today I'm here with our global team of experts to discuss empathy or emptiness and the impact that AI has on qualitative research and the human connection. Next slide, please, Jim. So our global team has done groundbreaking work on the intersection of artificial and human intelligence. And today I'm excited because we'll illuminate some fascinating findings from moderator bots to synthetic respondents and the metaverse, and the importance of real unheard voices of humans on the fringe. Next slide, Jim. If you all are logging in today, it's because you know that generative AI has really transformed our industry. And this forces us to examine the value of the human element in research and what it means to be human. This is especially true for qualitative. The large language models in AI have been really useful in qual because they work from language, and qualitative involves a lot of words. But at the same time, qualitative is arguably the most human-centric discipline in research. So we need to get the balance right. And that means, next slide, we need to understand what humans uniquely contribute and where AI can best assist us. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So now I'll turn it over to Ajay, Rollo, and Jim, fresh from SMR Congress, where they won not only the best paper at Congress, but also the Peter Cooper Award for Best Qualitative Paper. And they're going to talk about the pros and the pitfalls of Gen AI in qual research. Over to you, Ajay.
Thank you so much, Heather. But before we start, let me tell you a story. Now, Jim, Rollo, and I are not just colleagues, but we're also friends who enjoy fishing and a lazy conversation. During our last fishing trip to Panama, where, by the way, I caught the biggest fish, our discussions turned to AI and the impact that it was having on the insights industry. Some in the insights industry believe that generative AI is a blessing and it could free researchers from boring tasks, whereas others fear that it could lead to the loss of the qualitative craft. And just like the rest, the three of us didn't agree on the role of AI either. We knew we had to leave aside our personal biases and study this issue with a beginner's mind. That's where we started to play around with the idea. We let our 6-year-olds emerge and began speculating on these wondrous what-if scenarios. What could be the role of AI? Is it purely for monotonous tasks? What about the role of the human? Is it purely to click on those recaptures? And what's the role of the environment itself? The idea of an AI bot leading a focus group in the metaverse with synthetic respondents might sound like it's an opening line to a far-fetched joke, or is it a real possibility? Well, these questions completely blew my mind, and we knew that we had to create a set of potential experiments to study this even further. We looked at it and said, well, as we embark on our journey, we need to ask ourselves, does AI foster greater empathy or leave us feeling empty? And to investigate this, we had 3 potential experiments. The first was where we had an AI moderator instead of a human. We conducted this in the US. The second is where we had synthetic respondents instead of humans, which is a study we conducted in Japan. And the third was where we looked at 2 humans talking to each other in the virtual environment. This is something that we looked at in the UK, in the metaverse itself. We reflected on how these would impact the research process and the findings. Now, when we think about empathy, this usually involves an abstract metaphor, something about walking in someone else's shoes. And whilst this sounds profound, it doesn't give us a clear set of assessment criteria. And so to evaluate the AI moderator's ability to actually evoke empathy, we used Mary Copeland's framework for empathy, which talks about three aspects. The first is affective matching. Would the AI moderator be able to recognize and mirror the respondent's emotion to build rapport? Other-oriented perspective taking would deal with understanding another person's thoughts and emotions from their viewpoint without judgment. Would the AI moderator, just like a human, be able to probe and uncover their true perspective? And then there's self-other differentiation. Would the AI moderator maintain focus on the objectives at hand and realize that it's actually there to do a job, to answer the client's business questions? For this study, we used the GPT-4o model to power our moderator bots, and we could use the voice function to conduct verbal interviews with a set of respondents and spoke to them about their preferences on streaming platforms in the US. We tried to understand their viewing habits, their preferences, and post this short interview, a human moderator followed up with the respondents and asked them how they felt about being interviewed by a bot. What we found was that post an initial set of technical difficulties, the AI moderator bot actually performed surprisingly well. Its ability to reference specific details like TV shows, episode titles, storylines, made the respondent feel heard and validated, especially when you compare it with an untrained moderator. Here's what happened when I tested this out myself. I love sci-fi that is positive, not dystopian universes. I love Star Trek and Star Wars, as you can tell from my t-shirt.
That's awesome, Ajay. Your passion for Star Trek and Star Wars really shines through, and it's great to hear that you're into the more optimistic side of sci-fi. I can only imagine how cool your t-shirt must be.
What you saw from that clip was the fact that the bot knew exactly what I felt about Star Trek and Star Wars. It even knew my favorite episode on Star Trek, Mirror Mirror. It complimented me on my t-shirt, and that clearly made me smile. But unlike a seasoned human moderator, it didn't delve into the reasons behind my love and optimism for sci-fi. It acknowledged my emotion, but moved on very swiftly to the next question. And in that regard, it behaved very much like a novice. It struggled with meaningful improvisation, with real-time adaptation. It couldn't apply human-like intuition to go off script and smell out that insight, which could help the client achieve their research and business objectives. It ran the risk of giving me a set of responses which were pretty generic. For example, the respondents talked about how when they looked at various television shows, they would rely on word of mouth rather than looking at the responses from or the recommendations from the platform itself. Now, this is where the bot didn't probe on why that was the case. How could things be made better? What we also saw is that it has a fairly weak social contract. Now, experienced moderators use fatigue cues like ums and ahs and pauses when they want a deeper answer. They signal to the respondent that you're not quite done, tell me more. This is very much leveraging an unwritten social contract, just like when you are with your friends and you hold out your fist, you invite a fist bump. Now, the AI bot couldn't leverage this dynamic at all. it behaves very much like a junior moderator, someone who is perhaps just starting off in its profession, someone who has its eye on the discussion guide but loses focus of the prize right in front of it. So what is it good for? Well, it's very clear that at this state, it may not replace your favorite human moderator just as yet, but it does allow you to do a couple of things pretty well. Well, think about always on access. Imagine a scenario where you are conducting a study to understand pain. Your respondent has a migraine at 3 a.m., wants to check in with the moderator and talk to them about that experience, but the moderator is not around. That's where an AI bot could play a meaningful role. You can also look at it in terms of scale and speed. Imagine an army of these bots, 300 of them conducting numerous interviews simultaneously to cut down on time. You could also take a look at quantitative conversational surveys to probe on open-endeds, and it'll give you a little bit more than what you're currently getting, but also as an engagement tool to look at encouraging respondents on long-term communities to acknowledge what they've said and look at greater participation. But keep in mind that all of these cases are better than what you may get today, but they ain't exactly qual. Rollo, tell us a little bit more about what we found on the virtual environment.
Thank you, Ajay. So we're on this boat fishing in the Panama Canal, where, contrary to popular belief, I caught the biggest fish. But we were talking about another form of text that had us all enthralled before AI eclipsed it, which is virtual reality or mixed reality, to be more precise. We asked ourselves the question, what happens if you put people in the virtuality spectrum, and what happens if you make them anonymous? So the study we did, there was 8 discussion groups in total, 2 in each of 4 different mediums. So the first one was face-to-face, second one was traditional video online, a bit like this, and then the third was desktop VR, and the last one was immersive VR. That's with a headset where you're completely enclosed within, and if you've never done that before, it's a very different experience. We try to keep all the factors equal as much as possible: anonymity, moderator, discussion guide, the stimulus we showed. As much as we could, we kept it all the same. So the first thing to think about with mixed reality, it offers us an extraordinary medium for research. You have, in a way, a limitless array of co-creation tools within an infinitely customizable environment, which for qual is obviously brilliant. So when that tech becomes a little bit more user-friendly and Gen AI tools are built in a bit more seamlessly, mixed reality is going to change the way that we do qual. So we know not everyone wants to take part in research, but also not everyone can take part in research. For example, you rarely see people who are differently able take part in discussion-based activities in qual, yet their experiences can prove invaluable. So in that way, mixed reality spaces can attract new people into research from what Ajay and April have termed in a separate paper, the vibrant fringes. The other thing you notice when you're into this environment, you immerse people into this mixed reality environment, which essentially is a gaming environment, is it immediately taps into people's play mode. And that helps them open up their creativity and their imagination, which for qual is really good. It's a perfect environment. So it's a mixture of the setting, the parallels of the gaming environment, those skills that they come up with. You'll see here our friend Giraffe, he just bounced around continuously for the whole 2 hours, and you're in the middle of a discussion and out come those dance moves, which can be a little bit unnerving, but you get used to it. What that shows, though, is it's all about this play mode. Now, anonymity is a spectrum. It's not an on-off switch. So in virtual reality, basically you can dress yourself up in any avatar that you want. You can essentially choose to be whoever you want to be. What's really interesting to us is that slow release of true identity over the period of time, and that we find in qual is a really useful thing to do. Now, even when people lie, they tell you the truth. They tell you a truth. In Kroll, there are layers of truth, and each time you unravel that layer, it tells us a story. We often talk about the real self, who we really are, and then the projected self is how we want others to see us. And that projected self is a goldmine of tensions and aspirations. And for that reason, anonymity has real research value, self-expression, creativity, understanding that projected self, less so in the world of understanding, the real world behavior of the real self. It helps us understand what could be rather than what is. But there's tension here between anonymity and authentic self-expression. So anonymity can empower people, it can make vulnerable people very safe, it provides a way of discussing sensitive topics, and it's really good for that as well. Lots of women talk to us about misogyny in the online space, especially in the gaming space, where they would create names and avatars that were gender neutral, or they simply pretended to be a man. But that pretense is not authentically them, and nor is it their projected self. So, but it does open up this sense of freedom. You'll see here our friend Giraffe again. He goes off in the middle of the group, comes back as a woman in a rather fetching dress, and why not? We quizzed him about it afterwards. Went full on Freud, like, so how did you feel in your dress, Giraffe? But he just said, I simply loved experimenting. I could, therefore I did. And again, why not? And so in that way, anonymity helps people explore the fringes within themselves as well. And it really taps into that in an engaging way. So you'll see here on the left-hand side of this spectrum, if you just click through there, Jim, there's less choice. There's less anonymity. You've got physical presence and the unconscious gestures that you can't hide. That's more in the real world and the less anonymity. On the right-hand side, it's more about what you choose to show to the world, your avatar that you've created, and the conscious gestures that you do within virtual reality. On the left-hand side is much more of a business setting. That's really good for reality, evaluation, giving them tasks and understanding that real self. Whereas on the play setting on the right, it's really good for imagination, co-creation activities, that freedom of expression and understanding that projected self. Jim, tell us about synthetic respondents.
Yeah, so back to this Panama fishing trip where, let's be really, really clear, I caught the biggest fish. We explored the complex topic of synthetic respondents. Now, there's lots of ways to generate synthetic data. We know that, whether we're talking generative adversarial networks or data imputation models, there's lots to choose from. We chose to go down the path of training AI bots for each human respondent that we were going to test with. So we started with a Japanese, one of our Japanese online communities. In this community, we do both qual and quant research, and we collect quite a lot of profile information on each of the respondents, so each of the community members. We started with that. We went into that very large community, and we looked for a project that would be robust enough to help us train our AI bots. And we found one in that community, in that project. We had 150 respondents that had participated and provided very robust answers for a very specific category. And that became our anchor. We then went and we designed a second project that included 3 activities, one on evaluation, one on exploration, and one on ideation. Those 3 robust activities in that second project, we invited the 150 respondents to that first project to the second project, and they participated in those 3 activities. So now we've got project 1, we have project 2, and we have a bunch of robust profile information on those respondents. Now what we had what we needed to hand over the data to our AI analyst team to start building the AI bots. So we took all the information, all the responses from that first project and the profile information of the respondents, and we generated one AI bot, which we're calling a digital twin, for each of the human counterparts. So we had, at the end of the day, we had trained 150 unique digital twins that were trained on the data of their human counterparts. And that's when we took the digital twins and we asked the same questions on project number 2, one on evaluation, one on exploration, one on ideation. We asked them the same questions and they came back with pretty interesting results. But before we get to the results, what was our hypothesis? Our hypothesis was that what we would find, the insights that would be uncovered, would tend to skew towards a central tendency, because we know that LLMs are based on probability models. Now, tending to skew towards that central tendency isn't good for qualitative research. What in qualitative we're looking for is everything back to that vibrant fringes. All the messiness on the outside is where you really find a rich ground of ideas to build off of. So what did we find? We did find that the outcome was very compelling. The digital twins did fantastic, but the result was like a painting that lacked the color and texture of a masterpiece. It missed some very important parts. It struggled to replicate the emotional state of humans, the counterintuitive, the complex social dynamics. It also, I should have said, inside of those where it missed primarily on evaluation and exploration. We also did thematic analysis in that period for those 2 areas, and we saw that the human respondents delivered more themes than the digital twins. So we saw a more robust set of data that we could actually dive into deeper on evaluation and exploration. But what we did see was the digital twins outperformed their human counterparts when it came to ideation. Now, that comes with a disclaimer. So yes, they did better for complex, more comprehensive ideas. A good example is when we asked the humans to ideate on ingredients for a new product. The humans came back with 1 or 2 ideas that were good, but when we probed them to come back with more ingredients, it was a hard exercise. But for the digital twins, they actually delivered more ideas with more ingredients, but they still skewed towards the rational. They missed out on some of that social and cultural nuance that connected to the idea. So in the end, we can say that for evaluation and exploration, synthetic respondents, not quite yet. But for ideation, they definitely have their foot in the door. So where do we go from here, Rollo?
So our aim with the 3 studies of moderator, respondent, and setting has been to temper our natural instinctive enthusiasm for AR and VR with a solid dose of pragmatism and understanding. So for sure, AI opens up new opportunities, new use cases, but right now it lacks that nuanced understanding and empathy that a human expert can bring to the table. Virtual environments and anonymity opens up this, sense of freedom, creativity, and wonder, but the tech is still a little bit too clunky for everyday research. At some stage in the future, these technologies are going to combine to do things that we haven't even thought about, but not yet. So it's astonishing what AI can do. It really is. It's amazing how real an AI bot sounds and how convincing synthetic insight reads. But maybe we're deceived by our astonishment. We're duped into believing that something that sounds so real really is real. And we should be cautious of simulating insight. So qual insight, it comes, not from the respondent answering questions, but from the moderator questioning those answers. That ability to improvise, to use our natural instinct, to pick up on unexpected threads, means discovery of new, unexpected territory. The bot, it sounds like it's listening in an empathetic way. Actually, I really love what you're saying about Star Wars, blah, blah, blah. But in reality, that doesn't feed into the discussion at all. It doesn't change the direction of the dialogue. It's just a response to an answer. It doesn't question the answer to create new questions. And that's not qualitative conversation. It's essentially conversational quant. So it calls about discovery. It's about unearthing the unseen, the unsaid, and the unheard. You know, we look for the fringes, those edges, those individual experiences that go beyond the masses. That's the fuel to inspire our clients to be distinctive in what is an increasingly cluttered market. That's the power of one person's story that can change how you see things. AI, it pulls insight into the middle ground. We shouldn't sacrifice the fringes. AI holds enormous potential for our industry, but it runs the danger of vanillarizing insight by being applied in the wrong place at the wrong time.
So the big question is, playtime over? Have we tempered our enthusiasm over AI or mixed reality research?
No, quite the opposite. There's so much more to explore with and understand with regards to AI and VR, and we wouldn't stop experimenting. But whilst we celebrate the potential, we must be grown up about its application. HI and AI, human intelligence and artificial intelligence, seem to be the path forward for now.
So the big question, of course, is really who caught the biggest fish?
Yeah, that would be me, so I told you so.
Terrible. AI generated.
Hey, give me your crap. It's real.
Thanks, guys, so much. That was a really amazing work. And before we head into the wrap-ups, there's one really critical component of qualitative that really brings to light the human element, and that is the uniqueness in the respondents and what real humans in real life bring to the table. And this idea that you guys talked about of the vibrant fringes and that needle in a haystack or inspirational design target is something that we don't want to lose sight of, because AI, as it skews to a central tendency, is maybe good for some conclusions, but not good for others. So April, I'd love to hand it over to you to illuminate us a little bit on the vibrant fringes.
Well, thanks so much, Heather. And by the way, I just love their presentation, right? There's so much good stuff in there, and they made it fun. So thank you guys for that. I learned so much from what you said to me. And I think I'm going to start this by just telling you all a story that sort of illustrates this. So I'm a New Yorker. I grew up here in New York, and I lived through, in 2018, we here in New York had a crisis. Had a major crisis on the grocery shelves. We had shelves that were empty. We had, particularly in coffee shops, there were people who were on lines trying to get certain ingredients in their coffee. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of it was buzzing because there was this one element that was missing. We were in the midst of a shortage of oat milk. From Brooklyn to Harlem, we could not find oat milk anywhere because the demand for this product had built up so much over the past few years. So I tell you that story, and if we can go to the next slide, Jim. We're going to move from fishes to cows as we talk about this. When I think about cow's milk and what it was providing and what oat milk and what plant-based milks were providing, the only way to understand the difference between the two was to talk to people who had some kind of intolerance to cow's milk. They had ways of trying to get away from the protein that is in cow's milk that was causing lactose intolerance, cow's milk allergies, which could be very, very serious and very dangerous. They talked to those people, and in talking to those people, that fringe behavior became very much a massive one, right? So what we started to see then was that this new industry that, quite frankly, is right now a $16 billion industry that came from talking to people on the fringes. And I'm going to quote you from a guy who was the creative director at Oatly, which is a brand of oat milk that was part of this shortage we were talking about. He says, and I quote, "Oat milk was just for people who were lactose intolerant or had an allergy to milk. Vegans, vegetarians, people who at that time were on the fringe of society." So I was really glad he used that term because it plays directly to what it is we're talking about here. Can we somehow move our conversation outside of the masses into areas that have, more opportunity? So next slide, Jim. So I would argue that going to these vibrant fringes, as Rollo talked about, is really a cure for some of our more static categories. So veganism that we talked about is a $16 billion industry today. That was not the case not many years ago. When we look at non-alcoholic drinks, I love this idea of sort of flipping it on its edge, right? Let's talk to people who don't drink if we're an alcohol company and see what they're doing and what are some of the barriers and what would get them to drink some of our products. So non-alcoholic drinks is now a $13 billion category. Gluten-free, I remember when this was just starting to take hold and I was running some innovation teams that I made a huge mistake. I thought it was a niche opportunity, and it is not. It tends to be something that all of us have taken advantage of and have seen the opportunity within. It is now $7 billion. It will be a $14 billion industry by 2023. And natural hair care. Black women had always played in this role of perms and straightening. This natural thing started early in the 2000s. Right now, that is an $8 billion category that is projected to be $12 billion in the next 2 to 3 years. So there's huge opportunity in some of these vibrant fringes as we're talking about. And I'd love to talk a little bit about how we can tap into that and what it could be, what it could bring for us. So next slide, Jim. Jim actually said this, and I'm quoting St. Jim here, that AI can get you to similar results, but it lacks the color and the texture. Next slide. So let's talk about how these vibrant fringes actually do come alive and can actually make things come alive for us. So next slide. What you saw in the earlier presentation is that AI is good at certain things, right? But we have to recognize that it mirrors the consensus. It looks at what is, it looks at the current state of things, and it looks at the data that has been put into whatever it is it's analyzing. So it can consolidate that, it can come up with new insights. And that's why those ideas that, that Jim talked about toward the end, they're very much functional ideas. They're new ingredients, they're new things to put in. But again, it draws from what's already there, and it comes up with insights that I would argue are somewhat intuitive. They're not necessarily a surprise. They make perfect sense. But growth sometimes requires being distinctive in a very cluttered marketplace. So how can you really start to understand some of those things that AI might not be able to find, as opposed to the functional ideas and those functional ingredients? What are some of these emotional things? What is the emotional understanding that we need to get at in order to really take advantage of that? How do we imagine what could be instead of just drawing from what currently is? And how do the two things work together in a wonderful interplay that can really take you to new areas that lead to some of those categories we referred to? And then lastly, I think there are counterintuitive surprises that come about when you start looking at those long tails, when you start looking at where is it that, that people will to start to talk about things differently than when you may normally have talked about them. So the question then becomes, How do I find them? And that's what I get a lot from my clients right now. Love the idea, but how do I do this? Where do I find them? Where do I go? And how do I get to them? Next slide, Jim. I would argue the place to find them is to look to the long tails, right? Think about your distribution curve. Think about where you typically play, ask, talk to, analyze, and then think about where the tails start to really drag out. And it's within those long tails that you'll start to find some of the vibrant fringes that we've been talking about. So next slide. So where are some of those things? Well, I would argue, think about the people you don't normally talk to, right? Women aged, what is it, 25 to 54. There's a whole lot of people that fall outside of that, if that's really what your target market typically is. Let's look at emerging trends and behaviors. This wellness trend that's been happening certainly since COVID has unveiled a lot of new vibrant fringe behaviors that weren't there before. Mental health has become a huge thing now. Demographic shifts, mixed marriages, mixed people who don't necessarily want to be identified by a specific group. You know, fluidity in terms of sexuality, all those things are demographic shifts that are occurring right now. And how cool would it be to get ahead of that and talk to the people who are a part of it? There are wider societal and economic events that have happened, school loans, inflation, economic things that are driving people, particularly those who are in the fringes, to come up with some different solutions. And those solutions may very well be the creative ones we've been looking for. I would look at tribal groups and subcultures. Are there groups of people that seem to be doing something different about your product, or seem to be talking about it differently, or maybe seem to be, you know, walking away from it? And is there a way to capitalize, or at least talk to them to understand what you could do better in terms of the products that you provide? And is there some kind of intensity of this atypical belief or behavior? Veganism to me is very interesting, because when you talk to people who are living that way and eating that way, they are very, very passionate about why they're doing it and the things they're doing. Particularly those who were on the early side of that, who were in the vibrant fringes when we were looking at that. The other thing I want to mention is AI has a built-in bias, and we've seen this already many, many times, right? It's been proven that it's there, and there's a reason for that. We built it based on what we know. The people who were putting the data into it were building it based on what they knew, and that's not necessarily having talked to those people in the vibrant fringes. But here's what happens when you miss that. And I'd like to share a great video that Sophie, which is a financial institution online, has done to recognize people who have fallen out of those vibrant fringes that they normally talk to. So a very successful campaign for Sophie in terms of getting more people to sign up for their banking services. So given that, I thought it would be helpful to just talk about some things that you can do to try to tap into some of these things and how to recognize them. Jim, next slide, please. So here's one way we can approach this. We look at online social data, and in that we've got a tool here at Ipsos called Synthesio, where they actually match up need solution pairs that seem to be happening out there in the metaverse, just these interesting dualities that seem to be popping up. We then go in and we try to form groups from these need solution pairs that seem to be occurring. And once we see how these fringe groups are starting to come together, we can then go in and talk to people face to face, bring in that human exploration. Who are they? What is happening in the context of why they are, you know, finding these need solution opportunities? And then lastly, going in and doing some really deep listening and observation around this atypical usage. What are some of the solutions, and what are the whys behind how people have developed those solutions? So there are tools that we have put together that really help to identify who are your fringes and how might you talk to them. So as you look at fringes, next slide, Jim, it really does bring inspiration in a few different ways, and it could play out in a couple of ways here. So you could actually design for the fringes and realize that there's a broader benefit from what you have looked at. So for example, all of our haptic watches that we are now feeling on our skin on a day-to-day basis were not designed for us. They were designed for people who couldn't read the watches, who needed to have some kind of feeling in order to know what was happening on their watch bands. You could have a broader design that actually gets used differently or appreciated differently by the fringes. So these pods that we all now use in our laundry were designed broadly, right, for everybody. But again, blind people who cannot measure, or people who can't see what they're measuring or feel what they're measuring, they can just grab a pod and they know they've got the right measurement right there. So it was a broader design that actually had a fringe benefit that we could talk to. And then sometimes there's just a fringe benefit for the fringe group that you could bolt on incrementally to what you currently do. This right here is actually a design covering for a prosthetic. Isn't it cool to want something that's beautiful to cover what it is you're proudly exhibiting? So I end today kind of talking about how do we open our minds to looking at those long tails and talking to those people who are in what we are calling these vibrant fringes, and using that for growth opportunities for our business.
Fantastic, April. Thank you so much. I love those examples and the vibrant fringes. You know, the most eye-opening insights come from real people in real life and real experiences, and you're not going to find the fringes in AI. So I love those examples. Thanks so much. All right, everyone. So what does this mean? Everything that our team shared was so insightful and enlightening, but what does it really mean, or what are the key takeaways? I wanted to highlight just a few key things to remember. First is, it's easy to be deceived by AI. And so there is a need for very balanced exploration. So we need to actively explore the potential of AI, but realize that we humans are in control of the application. And we can't always take what we hear from AI for face value. We really have to vet it. Number two, insight comes not from answering the questions, but from questioning the answers that we get from AI or from humans. So remember that artificial intelligence, it wants to give you an answer. It wants to please you, but it may not be fully true or accurate. And this is where the combination again comes into play. The third, the difference between conversational quant and a qualitative conversation. I think Rollo spoke to this. So qualitative conversation really allows you to probe, pick up on nonverbal cues, pivot with people in a way that like a moderator bot cannot. That allows you to improvise and use natural instincts and things that are very, very human in order to uncover the stories. Next, number four, augment human abilities, but don't replace the human with AI. So as we talked about, AI is an amazing tool, but it's not a replacement for human, particularly when it comes to qualitative. So we have a number of ways that we use AI as part of our process, but the human is always in the lead to make sure that we have the best of both worlds. The fifth, also interesting to remember that, and I think everyone knows this, but AI looks back, not forward. And it doesn't do well with like very ill-posed questions. So at Ipsos and in UU, our consultants are certified in AI and experts in prompt engineering, so we can really help here because the better the question, the better the output that you get as well. All right, next, number 6, and I love this one, it's my favorite. Embrace the unique, not just the mainstream. And particularly for foundational or exploratory work, AI can really miss the richness of insights as well as the stories from the fringes that your team really needs for inspiration. So for this, you need human-to-human contact, and we recommend in-person, in-context work like ethnography and immersions to really understand those humans on the fringe. All right, next. Leverage anonymity and immersiveness to help people explore the fringes within themselves. And this goes back to Rollo's virtual world and what came to light when people had the chance to explore. In qualitative, there are layers of truth that we are constantly uncovering to tell a story. There's the real self of who you really are, and then there's your projected self of how you want others to see you. And that whole spectrum offers a goldmine of tension and inspiration and aspirations that allow us to explore deep human insights. Number 8, AI ideas solve for the pain point and not necessarily the person. So in all of our research on research, we found that AI tends to be more rationally skewed. It solves for the pain point, not the person, when we know that emotion is really what drives human decisions and behaviors. So that actually leads to number 9. Ideation should be a human and an AI collaboration when it comes to ideation. We know that AI adds real value here, and in fact can be better than humans sometimes at generating a lot of ideas and going really deep on those ideas. But we know once again that those ideas tend to skew functional, and that humans, real humans, bring the social and the emotional context that you need to really make sure that your brands and your offers are relevant. That's why we have tools like 4.ai as a tool for workshops that we use in conjunction with our own human intelligence to elevate the insights in proprietary prompt engineering to really get at the best and most divergent ideas, but then converging in areas that are really relevant to real people. And then last, not least, AI offers promise and a lot of possibilities, but without human intuition and imagination to really elevate insights, it risks emptiness over empathy. And so I guess that's the overarching takeaway that I have, is that artificial intelligence in this world that we're in is a very good tool. Human intelligence is even better. And the combination of the two, human and artificial intelligence, is actually best. So before we get into the Q&A, I wanted to thank everyone for your time and joining. You'll get a lot of this documentation post the webinar, and please reach out to me. You have my information here, and we'll follow up as well if you want any further information. And now I'd like to spend the last few minutes, once again, thanking our team as well, our global team, for the very insightful research on research. If you guys want to come back on, because we're going to head to the Q&A. So if you have a question, pop it in the chat. And let's see, I'll try to get to as many as I can. Okay, so first up, our leadership has asked us to embrace AI for scale and efficiency and even cost savings. Can I get the same or better results with less human capital? Who wants to take that one?
I could venture a response. So there are some aspects that AI would be able to assist with. In fact, we looked at a research study where we spoke to corporate communication leaders. This was, if memory serves me correctly, this was done last year itself in 23 countries. And what our research showed us is that a large proportion of them, about 87% of them, talked about how they definitely feel that AI would transform the way that their business operates. They felt that it would be doing meaningful aspects of their job itself. So it's very much here to stay, and it's definitely going to be able to take up tasks. Another study talked about how when just in terms of, again, corporate communication and brand building and communication itself, there's a large part that marketeers are already starting to get AI to do. So, adaptation of ideas and things of that sort. But it comes down to what exactly are we using AI for? Yes, it does help in certain aspects of efficiency. But if you do take a look at what kind of works really well, be it, take for example, communication, if you sacrifice empathy on the altar of efficiency, you come about a end product which doesn't really work. It's not effective. So it works for some aspects and perhaps not for others. And when you are engaging with your corporate leadership, you have to be very clear that yes, there are some gains, efficiency gains that would come about, but you have to be very careful about what exactly are you using AI for and where can humans play a role.
Just to add to that as well, there's a slight danger that we outsource our thinking a bit to AI. That once you start using AI, for the heavy lifting, you start using it also for the stuff that really needs that human emotional connection, understanding it, contextualizing it in real life. It can become a very easy thing to do. We outsource our thinking to it. There are some times that insight needs to hurt a little. It needs to be painful. You need to sweat. You need to feel it. It's the IKEA effect. You build something together, and that takes a bit of human insight, a bit of human thinking to get to that moment. So I would say echo what Ajay says there. The heavy lifting gets you to that place, but there is a clear role for that human to do that. And the people who play together, building insight, it's important to sweat a little bit of that. It should sting a little bit.
Like that. Anyone else? Ellen, are you seeing any other questions coming through on your end? I think that's it for mine.
One just came in. Do you want me to read it out?
That'd be great. Okay. Yes, that'd be great, Ellen.
Okay. Research design using AI will change as the affordances of AI grow. What kind of research questions do you think will be AI resistant?
That's a fabulous question. And what we've seen is that when you're looking at exploration, when you're looking to find something new, you would still need to engage with humans. You would still need to speak to respondents. You would still need to use that data to see forward, right? What AI does, and large language models in particular, are trained on data that has come from the past. It's already occurred, which is not always a great predictor of what could happen in the future. Any sort of activity where you're trying to hypothesize what the future would be like, where you're looking to devise a set of products which are dramatically different from what have existed in the past. Those breakthrough innovations, those radical innovations, is where you would need to understand the human, not just the pain that they're suffering, but to solve for them as holistic beings.
I would just build on that and say that to question it, any research question that you're looking for emotional context, right now humans should still be leading the way.